relevance and relevant to the contemporary political developments. We have started this during the COVID period as like any other innovations. Now we could reach 12,500 subscribers, and we have introduced quite number of books, about 400, starting from, and we had guests starting from Bishop Jafarlal to Victor Strajari. Now Siddartha is joining that league. Welcome, Siddartha.
Hi, hello, and thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you everyone for being here.
So actually, while the country is waiting for the election results, I come across the review of this book in The Guardian. Then immediately I ordered and tried to contact Siddartha through X, and he's kind enough to direct me to channelize this program. Thank you, Siddartha, for that. And I requested Hartosh, the senior colleague in journalism, and now he's editing The Caravan. Both of them, both Siddartha and Hartosh, has one thing in common, if I am correct. They are good at long form journalism, which is fading away under the latest situations and circumstances like WhatsApp, Facebook, Insta, and all those things. Yes, this is a form of opening up a discussion or giving a scope for thinking wide and loud about a particular theme, selected theme, going back into the history, tracing the roots, and then giving connecting to the present, so that the audience, a reader, can get a comprehensive picture of it. So that's how I like this long form journalism, which is rare in today's world. And I was waiting for this book to be released in India. Finally, it got released in the month of June. When I tried to reach out Siddartha, it was yet to be released at that time. The Indian US version is out, but not the Indian version. I don't know. Siddartha waited till the results are declared to be released in India. There must be some reason behind that. With these few words, basically our channel structuring of the channel will be show will be like this. Usually we releases the Zoom link only to the active participants, particularly the author and the discussant, because to avoid the unnecessary disturbances to the presentation. This link will go live in Manchi Pustakam YouTube, where the most of the people will be getting access to that. So each and every book of this nature will be reaching around 1,000 to 2,000 people each show. So this is our thing. Now for this today's show, what I propose is Siddartha will give a brief outlines of his thought behind this book. Of course, what the book is there and everyone can read it out. And he can also read his choice of paragraphs or interested pages, followed by his intervention from Hartosh. Then we'll go into a freewheeling discussion. Siddartha, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I am going to keep my preface very short because I like my journalism to be long form and my speeches to be short. Yeah, I think Twilight Prisoners, The Rise of the Hindu Right and the Fall of India is a collection of my essays and journalism for the last 13 years. And they basically trace the rise of the Hindu right in various forms, various places in India. But how did I come to this? So I would just start by saying that Hartosh and I actually know each other for many, many decades because we were both at the Indian Express at the same time in 1997, 98, before I left for the United States. So we both sort of experienced daily journalism, and Hartosh stayed on for a while. And we saw daily journalism, newspapers, but we also saw the rise of television, not so much the rise of social media. But there was this whole thing about speed, news and media, and the whole idea, the one idea of it was that it has to be fast. It has to cover everything that is happening. But of course, one of the things that was also happening in the beginning of the late 90s is what I would say is the rise of neoliberalism in India, the rise of capital, the rise of the decline of journalism. And so the number of things you could write about got shorter and shorter. There were more challenges. Hartosh knows it very well at a personal level. And that's partly I went to America because I did not want to necessarily go to the US, but I went because I didn't really feel I could do long form journalism here or even write about the issues that I was interested in, the political, social issues. And I think the big issues for me are very simple in India. They are about poverty, sort of incredible inequality, the violence against minorities and every kind of marginalized group, and the ravages of capitalism and climate change. And I think these things have become more manifest. It's become worse over the years. We can see the effects very clearly, but they didn't come out of nowhere. They did not. These things were already there. So I went to the United States, and the odd thing is I did not want to necessarily cover the Hindu right and its rise in my journalism. My interest was very simple in terms of India. I wanted to write about the northeast of India, which is where I grew up. And it is very marginalized in relationship to the rest of the country. The way it is covered is very objectionable. It is usually covered in a kind of a combination of security lens, or so as a border issue and a security issue, and then sort of exotic indigenous tribal people and tourism. And neither of these captures the complexity of lives of people there. So that's what I wanted to write about. And I started doing that in fiction as novels because I didn't know who I could do it for in journalism. But then one of the things that happened in India, when I was living in New York and I was doing my PhD at Columbia, I noticed the kind of rise of Hindu right that was happening. And my very first freelance article that I did for a Western publication was on the Hindu right and the banning of D.N. Jha's book on the ancient Hindus and how they ate beef, and sort of the ban and the demonstrations against it and the book burning. And so I kind of fell accidentally almost into covering the Hindu right. But that was also partly because very few writers, and we have very many well-known Indian writers in the diaspora, as well as in India, people with access to big publications. But I would say that with the exception of Arundhati Roy and Pankaj Mishra, almost no Indian writer with access to Western publications has raised their voice in a direct way, in a critical way, and some have begun to do so now. But this is 2024. I think even by 2002, very obviously, it was very clear what Modi and the Hindu right were capable of, if it wasn't clear to people before then. And I am interested in continuities of the past. So I started pitching stories to publishers, to editors, to magazines in America and Britain. And I began doing these stories, long form stories. Long form stories allows a reader to reflect on what is happening because we are consumed by the pace of events. It allows the writer to reflect on the pace of events as well. And it's very time consuming, which is why it's very time consuming. It's very expensive. It takes me about 3 to 4 months to do one story, to a good long form story. It takes me about a month to 5 weeks to report it. It takes me another month to 6 weeks to write it. And then it takes another month and a half for the editing and the American magazine journalism. I'm very critical of American journalism, but it has a wonderful institutional fact checking. And that is everything's beautifully fact checked in this book because I have done it for various publications there, and they have fact checkers go through it. So the truth is important to me, So that's how I did these long form stories. And I realized sometime during the pandemic, just like your channel, I had a novel coming out, but I was looking back through my nonfiction because, I was reporting. And then I realized that a lot of these pieces were inaccessible to Indian readers because they were behind paywalls, like Harper's or New York Times Magazine, or they had come out a long time ago and people hadn't really read them at the time in India. So I thought it would be wonderful to bring it together as a collection in both in the US and in India. And my Indian publishers were very excited. They were concerned given the present climate, given the present administration. But as I said, everything has been thoroughly fact-checked. This is not fiction. I make up things all the time in my novels, but this is not a novel. And everything is scrupulously researched and fact-checked. And some of it is just simply putting it down. I often, especially like the Narendra Modi piece, which I wrote for the New Republic, which is the title piece, the first piece. I was simply recording it for future generations because it was a very depressing moment, even the lack of reaction and the embrace of Modi by the US and the UK governments. And I was simply doing it partly for my conscience and partly to record for future generations. So that's the way this book came about. And it has 3 sections. And part one is a kind of it starts with an essay on Narendra Modi. It's called Nowhere Man, The Violence, Rage, and Insecurity of Narendra Modi. And then 2 and 3 go back in time a little bit. They go back to the pre-Modi years because I also think that the Congress regime is responsible for many of the sins of this country as well. So one is a piece on Bhopal, the 30th anniversary of Bhopal, and just how we have completely allowed people to be forgotten and to be what is the worst industrial disaster in the history of the world. And then another chapter on this hidden refugee camp in Manipur, a Burmese hidden refugee camp, and which was kind of betrayed by the Congress government. The Burmese dissidents were made these promises that India would back them in their fight to democracy. And my story was about how the Indian government was complicit with just interest in securing its borders and oil reserves rather than any kind of solidarity with people fighting for a democratic regime, for democratic government. The second section has some of the most recent pieces. One is a piece I did for the New York Times Magazine, where I traveled back to Assam, close to where I grew up, to write on the detention centers and the sort of the disenfranchisement of Bengali Muslims. Another is on my journey to the Ayodhya temple to see the Ram Mandir being built. And then I have an essay on the Hindu right sort of fantasy and the cultural aspects. And then I have the part 3 is about resistance. And so it starts with a chapter on Gauri Lankesh and how a section of the Hindu right felt that they had to silence her violently, which is followed by particularly the Modi regime's a widespread application of anti-terror laws, and in particular the Bhima Koregaon, the BK-16 case. And finally, it ends with a profile of Arundhati Roy, which I did for the New York Times Magazine as a writer who has tried to work in both fiction and nonfiction, between politics and art, and has steadfastly critiqued both the Hindu right and neoliberalism and foreign empire imperialism consistently over her career. So that is the broad book, and you can read each long form piece on its own, but I think taken together, they do present a kind of total picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Siddartha, for the brief outlines about your book. Hartosh? Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for calling me to this discussion. As Siddartha mentioned, we go back a long time, and I think we've had a running dialogue since the time we were on the Express desk together in 1997. I think a dhaba at the back of the Express, food and a lot of alcohol, and I think that's continued till now. So anything that I say here is very personal. I am an old friend and unabashed fan of Siddartha's writing. Very few people move from fiction to non-fiction and back again with any ease. Most people don't do either well. So it's rare that you come across someone who does both well. The themes in this book are themes that we have spoken about over a long period of time. My own sense of long format journalism and work on India is that largely books that come out of the West on India books are books I would not read. Mostly they are written by authors who have nothing to say to me. They are often superficial. They are a collection of assorted pieces that don't hold together. I think Siddartha is the one exception, apart from being a voice who has questioned and critically examined this government outside. He has also written about India in a way that is born out of repeated emotions and areas. It is not a superficial 1 day, 2 day trip sitting in Delhi, talking to 5 people, going back and writing a piece. Many of these pieces are pieces that Indian journalism should have produced from India and has not been able to. Neither are these pieces in a sorted collection. I think the very view that Siddartha brings to India shapes these pieces. I think you can quite clearly, as you run through the book, see the entire span of what the Hindu right represents. From its history to its personalities to its concerns, both with history and with modernity and science. I think we will go back and talk about particular essays and pieces in some detail when the discussion happens. So I will not elaborate on that yet. But I think much of what concerns us with the Hindu right has been documented in detail. There is a fascinating piece on the idea of the Viman in ancient India, a very modern invention. And this is true of so much of the Hindu right, including in part things like yoga, and is a reflective of something that we see even in the new education policy, which is driving the curriculum in this country, because the belief system of the idea of an ancient India that knew many things, which are being rediscovered, informs this worldview. So what can often seem apparently absurd actually is at the very basis of how this government and the RSS itself thinks of many things. The idea of the Congress, both in the camps on the Burma border and Bhopal. I actually was an Indian Express reporter in Bhopal for a couple of years, and I think given that we are in 30th year, I would like to mention a shared friend, Siddartha, and I had, Abdul Jabbar, a few men who worked consistently on the ground in the face of a cover-up that has extended for 30 years, in which both the BJP and the Congress have been part. And I think Siddartha has detailed this in the piece, has only grown with liberalization. The Manmohan government, in its eagerness to let Dow back into the country, participated in actually speeding up the erasure of Bhopal from public memory. We have not seen Bhopal being dealt with in Indian journalism in a sustained fashion, even though it says something critical about us. And I think it is the story of our past 30 years, in which both the BJP and the Congress have been participants. The idea of what this worldview, and this is shared by both the Congress and the BJP, has done across India, not just in places like Manipur, but in Punjab or Kashmir, is again something that I don't have to expound on, but I think reading a single piece on Manipur is actually a good reflection of what you are going to see or encounter in many other parts of the country. And Siddartha writes out of the places he knows best. He is not heading into Punjab because it may be an interesting story. He has spent time and gone back and examined things as they stand at the moment in a way that brings in his own knowledge and his own past, which is why these pieces have a certain power that would otherwise be missing. He returns to the region he knows well, Assam, Manipur, the Northeast, repeatedly. There is also, I think, a third strand that runs through this book that I just want to highlight because we often miss out, that in the Modi years, in the last 10 years, and people see a break. Yes, there is a break because of these electoral results. But this is a long-term project. There were people who thought the Vajpayee government was a moderate government. I was posted in Madhya Pradesh at the time. It was anything but moderate. So in Delhi, yes, we are witnessing a certain moderation. Muslim houses are still being demolished. Lynchings are still taking place. The fear in the entire Hindi belt of being a minority has not gone away, irrespective of what we might think of the election results. The opposition to Modi, the articulation of this opposition, which, as Siddartha says, now a few people are beginning to state, but through the early years of the Modi era was entirely absent, I think largely came from two ideological streams. You have to give the left the credit. People like Gauri Lankesh, people represented in the Bhima Koregaon case, as well as minorities, both Muslims and Sikhs, because they were at the receiving end of this worldview. And if you look at the targeting of dissidents through this period, it is amplified by the RSS worldview, in which it has repeatedly called on the Marxists and the Muslims as enemies of the very India that they want to establish, which is why you will see that the only people, the only dissidents who have been jailed, who have faced sentences, who continue to be in jail, are either Marxists or Muslims or both. You do not have liberals outside this framework who may have been vocal in criticizing this government, who may have exercised their right to criticize that government, face the same clampdown that these two demarcations that I made have faced and continue to face. And this we can put down to the ideology of the RSS. This is again an essential part of both. We can read it in the Bhima Koregaon chapter. We can read it through the Gauri Lankesh chapter. We can read it through what is happening in Manipur, through what is happening in Assam, the NRC itself, and it continues with us today. We often overlook this when we put all dissidents together. We often overlook this when we try and state that the opposition to Modi is all in the same category or faces the same threat. I think a large number of people could have been far more articulate through this period without having to worry about it, yet have ducked and run away from a task that stood before us. I think much of this is evident in a reading of this book against the circumstances of India. It doesn't need to be spelled out. And I think these are the things that I think as we go ahead and discuss the book will become apparent. But to me, if I were today, again, because often it happens that there are informed journalists who come into the country, there are people who really want to understand what is happening. They come with all the Western myth making about Modi. There are people who made some attempts to go and read a little more. I finally have one book that I can say they should read before they actually do some serious reporting in India. And I think I'll end on that note. Thanks.
Thank you, Santosh. Now the question is to Siddartha and both. India as a country that moved to freedom at midnight. Now moving down to the prison at Twilight. So what are the qualitative turns for this journey? Though it is related to the book, but it is longer than to the subjects dealt, but you are having an idea about it as being journalist in Delhi and around different parts of India and covering that particular period. It's very important to those shifts. Siddharth.
You mean why has India turned from that sort of promise of independence and decolonization to the present state? Well, I mean, I am ultimately not a nationalist, even of the left-wing variety. So I have always had a quarrel with India. All of my books have quarreled with the idea of India. And I think maybe the personal circumstances have something to do with it. I mean, what people call independence was, as we know, it was like Jhuta Azadi. I mean, it was also the partition. We also know that the violence in Punjab and Bengal was immense. And we are talking about an incredible degree of violence, right? We're talking about an abysmal degree of violence, particularly against rural people, particularly against poor people, and particularly against women. I don't think I am always critical of national myth making, no matter which nation it is. And so, I don't even use words like freedom. And of course, my father was a refugee. I am the descendant of a refugee. And we were outsiders growing up in the Northeast. But the Northeast itself was a colonial imperial outpost of the Indian government. So I think that India is not exceptional in this regard. I think even the Nehru government, which was very good in terms of its foreign policy, in terms of its larger understanding of the world, and had a certain cultured understanding of even India. But it was in its own way also it had inherited the colonial structures of power. And this is, we can see in country after country after country that inherited these colonial structures of violence, that they kept them, they maintained them, the policing, the judiciary, and that they were not responsive to the people. And so I think, we are always, I mean, for me, it's not a journey from freedom. Of course, I'm playing with it in the title of the book by calling it Twilight Prisoners. I'm playing with that promise. But that promise was never fulfilled properly for Kashmir, for the Northeast, for the Dalits, for the Adivasis, for large sections of impoverished people in Telangana. Again, this is India bombed its own people in the Mizoram. The Indian Air Force dropped bombs on the Mizo insurgents, this is not something to be proud of, on the basis of nationalism. But yeah, if we are to look at particular turning points, and then there is the added layer of the Hindu right, of Hindu fascism, and how it sat out the colonial resistance, collaborated shamefully with the British, stole certain ideas of fascism from European fascism, and then combined them with its own sort of puritanical, Brahminical, male, hierarchical, casteist prejudices, and created this concoction and lurked under the shadows of the political system. But they were present even in the beginning, obviously, in the partition, in the violence of the partition, and then in the assassination of Gandhi. But they lurked in the shadows. They are very patient. They waited. They played a long waiting game. I think 84 for me is a big turning point, and not just Bhopal, but the anti-Sikh killings perpetrated by the Congress government and its allies throughout the country, but particularly brutally in Delhi. It's something that I tackle in my novel, which came out last year. But I think that was a warning, and that itself was around a larger, just the way the Indian state responded to the separatist movements in Kashmir or Punjab or in the Northeast, the Naxalite, the there's so much repression against its own people. So democracy is something we have to question. If you're afraid to go into a police station, you don't really believe in a citizenship rights. If you're a Dalit, if you're a woman, you are afraid to go into a police station. What democracy is this? What kind of rights do we have? Right? If you're a Muslim, of course, you don't even go near it. But yeah, I think 84 was a kind of a flashpoint, and then Bhopal. And then I would say the demolition of the Babri Masjid, the rise of the Hindu right, and the coming of neoliberalism, the anti-Mandal protests, and the sort of I would say the convergence between upper caste concerns and anxieties about the new economic order, but turned against the Dalits, turned against people who've been oppressed for generations. And then the coming, and so we can see the trajectory. And it's obviously not the same way. It's a complex country. It's a big country. It didn't happen in the same way everywhere. But yeah, I mean, I even question the premise of freedom at midnight to begin with. And all my books have a quarrel with India, the idea of India. And I think that's allowed. It's not, I'm writing books. I'm not doing anything else. You can read it and you can criticize it if you don't like it. That is part of also the whole idea of having a society that is open to debate and difference, and even the notion of democracy or thinking or thought. Yes, so that's how I would put it. I don't know, Atosh, how would you pick the trajectory?
Well, one of the things that has happened is that over the years, I was not a great fan of Gandhi to begin with. And I have grown far more critical of Nehru than I was ever in the past. But one of the things that had always struck me, and when we talk of the idea of India, and I think it still matters to some extent, that in all of Gandhi's faddishness, and he had a huge number of followers, people who propped up later in Indian history, the latest manifestation being Anna Hazare. Why does he pick Nehru? And it's a question I've never seen answered properly. He had a lot of choices. Nehru would not have been prime minister without Gandhi particularly picking. And I always feel there were two things. One is that I think they had a shared concern, whether it was from patronage, from a point of view top down, of a protection of minorities, of getting them along in some ways. It came from a very different foundation for Gandhi and Nehru. The other was, I think, a word that still I have some concern for: the absence of resentment. That is, that you do not carry the hatred of your past, whether it was against your colonial masters or what you consider your history, into the present of whatever nation you're forming. Both were views that are totally antithetical to how the right sees this country. But despite that, the biggest mistake, and I think that mistake overshadows these two promises, is that India's independence, the freedom struggle, was a project of elite domination. It was dominated by the elites. It did not think outside a larger upper caste framework. It did not realize that we were a country where we were easier examining the violence done to us, but were afraid of looking at the violence we had done to ourselves. It was true of partition. I come from the part of Punjab where I have some impatience, because it's a necessary part of partition to remember the deaths of partition, the sufferings of partition. But if 750,000, a million more, whatever the figures, people died, then there were people killing them as well. And I know that the part of Punjab I come from is one of the parts of Punjab where the largest number of killings took place. We have never confronted those murders. In the same way, we have not confronted the violence of caste, which extends back at least 1,500 years. And neither the Congress nor the BJP has been able to deal with it. The only, I think, somewhat important fallout of Indian democracy, however messed up it is that it has opened, through assertions of identity, the possibilities of upsurge in the caste order. I think post-independence, as a political figure, Kashi Ram to me remains a central political figure, the most important one, who is yet to be examined in the way he deserves to be. And I think all this is evident in where we are today. Uh, Hindutva, I think, is a force. Now we are well aware of it. We know where it comes from. We know it is in the end, again, an upper caste elite domination project, which is why the Congress has always been bad at challenging it, because some of the motivations that drive the Congress are very similar to this. They may not be expressed with the same violence. When Rahul Gandhi stands up in parliament after this election result, he speaks in the name of Shiva. He wants to talk again. People close to the Congress continue to talk of 3,000 years of history, an idea of India that goes back to our understanding of where we come from. That again, in the end, is an upper caste elite dominance project. In the end, Modi was confronted and his numbers reduced because Hindutva once again has clashed with the dynamics of caste, which are reasserting themselves in Uttar Pradesh and across the country. I think the Congress has some sense of it. However badly they articulate the idea of caste census, they are realizing that there is a power here that neither Modi nor Hindutva nor they have been able to understand and control. So I think we are again in a present moment in a churning. So for me, I think the greatest achievement of Indian democracy is not nationhood. It is the slow, but I mean, if you look at 1,500 years compared to that, this 80 years is a pretty fast process. It is the attempted undoing of that violence. This hasn't come from necessarily a desire by the Congress to do it or most political parties, but it has been the fallout of people getting the vote and being able to assert themselves through identity in some senses. And I think we are at a pretty crucial juncture of that whole outlook at the present point of view. Where Hindutva goes, because Hindutva has also adapted to this, will depend on where this churning again throws us. They had once taken Kashiram's lesson and propelled themselves to power. That has not let them control caste, but they are facing that same problem again today. We'll have to see what happens over the next few years.
Is connected question to both of you. It is the movements that shaped the India from 60s to 80s are in some way connected to the rise of Mandal movement and the assertion of their rights and the struggle for democracy at the grassroots level. It's kind of interlinked movements that gave some flesh and blood to the content of democracy in Indian Constitution. So from that point, do we think that that specific movement and aspiration last out under the overshadowed by the what you call elite nationalism? Hatosh or Siddhartha, either way. Siddhartha?
Well, I mean, I think yes. I mean, it was obviously a backlash. I mean, the Hindu right channeled a kind of backlash, a sense of victimhood, a sense of grievance from the elites on what was quite a legitimate demand for greater participation in the nation and the opportunities which it had failed to provide people oppressed for over a millennia, as Tosh points out. So yes, it was very deftly channeled. It was definitely a backlash, and that's where that's where you have to look at what is the nature of the RSS. Why did it expand beyond in the late 80s? Why did it expand into openly political campaigning, into from its otherwise traditional practices of being a somewhat cultish sort of paramilitary, always lurking under the shadows. Lurking in the shadows, they opened, and of course it was, the fact that, this was also fed into a certain kind of upper middle class, upper caste, anxieties about losing the privileges that they had, or they felt they had a right to. So absolutely, I mean, the Hindu right is a kind of, very deliberate sort of, but as Hartosh points out, now we may be seeing the swing of that at the other end. And in that sense, there is a certain kind of promise. And Yes, I mean, Tosh is right. I mean, but not just in terms of elections. I also want to say in terms of education. One of the fact that you now see younger generations of journalists and writers just coming from even academics, people who just first generation very often to do this kind of work. And they come from places in all sorts of senses, from caste, from various identities, various regions that were never visible, even in forget about the Congress of the right, even in the elite left circles in India. They were not there. And now they are. And that is one of the heartening things and of, what is happening in India. But I also wanted to say we don't have too much time. Should we have questions from the others? Because we are running out. I think we have only 18 minutes more. So I was just concerned that we may run out of time.
If you are having time, we can give some more enlightenment to the people. While reading through your book, there is an interesting phrase: pride of wealth meeting the pride of identity. Pride of wealth meeting pride of identity. While reading these second half of the first article, there are parallels running through my mind of late 80s Punjab and early 21st century's Gujarat. Is there any link between them?
Talking about a link between, am I muted? No, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. I just wanted to say, well, I mean, I think there are very clear parallels between 84 and 2002. I mean, it doesn't, you don't have to reach very far to see the parallels. And they are all, just because we associate one with the Congress and the other with the Hindu right, doesn't change the fact that the parallels are very close. And I think what Hartosh was talking about the partition, the fact is we didn't just forget about Bhopal, we also forgot about 84 very quickly. It was kind of erased from national memory very quickly. And this is a problem. I think, again, my writing is about challenging that. Look, the very simply put, yes, 84 and 2002, but I want to make a larger point. Look, the Hindu right creates this concocted fantasy, both of the past and the future. This is true of most fascism. This is true of a lot of nationalism, because you need a kind of a mythic past, and then you need this sort of slightly, beautiful future you're moving to. And the BJP does that. And what it offers, the Hindu right offers, is a kind of a concocted mission, which is what I write about in the Vimanas, even the Ram Mandir. It's a concocted version of the past, which did not exist. But I am not of the opinion, unlike some liberals, that the real past was this beautiful place. Okay? Look, but what we are getting is really fake. But the real wasn't particularly, it is complicated. Like any history that we look at, we will find a lot of oppression and violence. And that is a part of, we have to look at that. We have to be willing to look back at that and say, yes, that's what we are. That's what we came from. That's what we all did. Or not all of us, but those were the things. But now we live on this kind of double lie, basically. First, not only are we not tackling that, so something like 84 or 2002. 2002 is a repetition of 84. It's a different it's a different political power authority. It's a different kind of, minority being targeted. But if you look at the way the police operated, or the way the bureaucracy operated, or the mob operated, or the media operated, and the way everybody just caved in, how little dissent there was among the great Indian global, especially the global elite, it's not surprising that, of course, there are great parallels between the two.
Professor Ramadu, do you want to have a question? Professor Ramadu. He works in Hyderabad Central University, Center for Social Exclusion.
Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I just wanted to share a small point with Hartosh. Even even Dalits do have the same opinion, Purapak, and some of his writings about the Harijans and the sanitation works and all. But despite all those things, don't you see Gandhi to be much better in this present context? Say in the kind of a transition. I don't say transition. Then the other side. Today, the system is totally fragmented. System is really in crisis, and myself, like Hartosh, used to discount Gandhi for different reasons. But now I feel Gandhi would have been much better than the present kind of rulers and all. Hartosh, I would like to request Hartosh to reflect on this.
I just keep it brief because I think it'll take us into a long digression otherwise. But my point is simple, that whatever Gandhian legacy, whether it was followed or not, the fact is the BJP or Hindutva was not born out of nowhere. It was preceded by the Congress ruling this country. It was preceded by liberalization. It was preceded by every attempt to keep things together. The reason it failed was the same reason. It was the blindness. And Gandhi very much had this blindness to the structure, the inequality of power of Indian society. It's the same inequality that the Hindu right has harvested. For all of RSS's opposition to liberalization in the beginning, the biggest beneficiary of liberalization has been the Hindu right. Look at the concentration of wealth and power and where it lies. It lies in exactly those castes and those people who share its ideas. But Gandhi poses no challenge to this idea. It can't come from there. It can't come from Rahul Gandhi holding up a picture of Shiva in Parliament either. I'm not saying I know the answers, but I know where they don't come from. That's all. I mean,
Siddharth, there's a question for you. In your No Man's Land article, you categorically stated the Modi engineered a hybrid vigilante police state, one which is rigorous, one punished and perpetrators were rewarded. Do you think that this can be scaled up to the country as big as and as diverse as India? The kind of state that is being structured in Gujarat?
So the question is whether it's possible to expand that. That's the attempt. That is the attempt that has been made. Obviously, it's not as easy because Gujarat is one state where the Hindu right rose very strong. The control became very strong. There was a consensus in society. No, it's not going to be. But there have been attempts, and the use. We know that extrajudicial executions are rampant in Chhattisgarh, for instance. We know that in the so-called places that are quote-unquote war zones, frontier zones, Kashmir, the Northeast, sometimes Northeast, it keeps changing. But, Hartosh and I know this very well, that, you cannot necessarily report with any kind of freedom in many of these places because democracy does not exist. Freedom of speech doesn't exist. Press rights don't exist. Even if you go in with a completely an open brief, as a journalist should do, that you are actually going to speak to everybody and interview everybody and try to give as accurate a picture as possible. But, extrajudicial, I mean, India's records is pretty abysmal. Torture is again rampant in the Indian prison system. And then, of course, the BK16 essay that I write about talks about the prisons population in India, not just those under the anti-terror laws, but also the poor and the marginalized. So no, I mean, the attempt has been made. It's not going to be, because yes, you're right. India is different. We've seen the setbacks in various electoral attempts that the BJP has made. But we can't just sit back and say, oh, because it's diverse, it can't happen. We have actually had this horrible government in power, for this horrible regime in power for 2 terms now, 3 terms now, 2 terms. But it's sometimes it's hard to remember like how long it's been. But also the Citizenship Amendment Act, the change of the constitutional changes, the Supreme Court's decision to the give ahead that that the Ram Mandir, it's okay for it to be built. We have seen the judiciary. So yes, may not happen in the exact way of Gujarat, but I have no hesitation in saying that the judiciary is completely compromised. Policing and the executive, the prison system is completely violent, one-sided on the side of the Hindu right and people in power. Of course, they haven't been able to do it in the same evenness everywhere because of the differences in population and the other parties. But that is no reason to be we can't be complacent. Already things are very, very bad.
Yeah, Hartosh, the same question to you, as you are and you are kind of victim to the moral censorship under Modi's regime, and you are the one who bring to the notice of the public, particularly through your publication, reading through your publication only, I came to know about Brij Mohan lawyer. Otherwise, there is no chance of even the people who are regular followers of the politics and developments knowing about the thing.
So look, obviously those 10 years were worse than anything that we could have expected. It was actually, as I said, outside the communists and minorities, it was the indirect exercise of power through financial control, actually, that was the most systemic damage that they did. I do believe that in Delhi and in many other places, it was possible to write and say what you needed to do. It was possible to report. We did that. There were others who did that. And I think a lot of people did not do it because they pretended to fear and terror that was greater than what actually existed in Delhi. And this is often the problem with a liberal elite formation, that it succumbs very easily to pressure and power. And this is what has happened during the Modi era. They are quick to see a bounce back because Modi is not yet as assertive. So they do not look to long-term formations of power of the Hindu right to see that one election does not change possibilities. It is not going to change the overall trend of Indian society. Yes, it does make a huge difference to minorities, to people who have faced much of the brunt of what has happened. But in the long-term trend, this is not the end of the Hindu right, quite the contrary. And I think both those periods, when they were silent and now when they are not silent, I think India's liberal intelligentsia gets both periods wrong. And they always excuse themselves from the blame that should come to them during this period.
Yeah, that's right. But even the covering parliament developments and reporting from the parliament is not as it used to be. So I also have an opportunity to cover the parliament for about 20 years in Delhi, but this is not the case today. Even the senior journalist could not enter into the parliament as entering into covering the political developments and lawmaking is the right of the right to know, is part of right to know, but thus have been drastically curtailed. Yeah, while reading the Siddartha, while reading the manufacturing foreigners, there is a kind of an attempt by the Hindutva to assimilate the regional elite into its larger project. Is that there's something happening in that Assam region also? And of course, we can see Tamil Nadu, Andhra, Telangana, to some extent in Kerala, Karnataka more particularly, they are trying to expand their tentacles by co-opting the elite and neo-elite, whatever you call. That class emerged from post-80s and post-90s. So what would be the impact at the political level, and what would be the impact at the public consciousness level?
Well, it damaged the public consciousness in a big way because, yes, it co-opted the regional elite. I mean, it's a classic imperial strategy to make people identify with your power and to wish to become part of it. And of course, they chose Assam was always a very early project of the Hindu right. As early as 1988, Vajpayee would campaign in Assam. And, when I think maybe in the early 90s, when I was reporting there, there was this whole debate between the BJP local legislator and the Congress legislator. And the Congress legislator, she was arguing that everybody should have the right to come if they're an oppressed minority, no matter their religion. And of course, the BJP man was saying that no, it's only the Hindus could be an oppressed minority in Bangladesh, and therefore only they should be allowed in. But it's a long-standing project of co-opting various regional elites. And the BJP does offer a lot in terms of, any ruling of dispensation does. The Congress wasn't very different in co-opting the ruling and local elites either. It offers a lot of power. There's a lot of, funds. There's a massive budget for, this is a road to upward mobility. And upward mobility both in terms of power and money, not just because, as we know, in India, it's not just money, it's also the social power that you have, the control over, these things go together. But yeah, this has been the case we've seen in Manipur, where the Meitei, the identity has been channeled against the, the violence against the Kukis. We've seen this in so many parts of the Northeast. The Hindu right is very clear. It can make accommodations with every group, but the Muslims. It can even with Dalits. It is very clear about that. Yes, it has its own casteist idea of that. But as you see in my piece again and again, whenever I talk to people from the RSS, whenever I talk to people from the Hindu right, the one group of people, if you're a Muslim, you do not belong. You are not from here. You did not come here. You convert. All their argument is you're a Hindu because you converted, so convert back and then we'll see. But then we'll see. But so in something like Assam, you will see the Modi or the Modi's proxy regime, they'll make gestures towards women, towards children, towards tribals, towards every marginalized group, but the Muslims, because that is, and the Marxists, the leftists, it's a different thing. It's an ideological battle. It's not a battle of identity. It's a battle of like, these people are a threat. They could actually challenge us because they were a mass-based organization. They are, so they know this is, but that's very clear all the way back to the origins of the Hindu right, the founding texts, the founding visions. And of course, the other great enemy is Westerners, but that's more complicated because they're so implicated in capital and the military hardware. India is the biggest arms buyer from the United States. But yes, ultimately, to go back to the Northeast or Assam, yes, that's been the pattern everywhere. And they're trying that in Bengal. They're trying that in West Bengal. They're trying it in every possible state. And, it's it's often a very successful strategy.
In that sense, somehow it becoming a co-opted partner at international level by the imperialist forces who are the first world countries against the Islamophobia, because they got a good friend who can take on face to face against the Muslims in India.
Well, it's not an accident that the Hindu right, in 2002, it's not an accident that it happened when it did, because it very successfully sort of, co-opted the West's own sort of racism and paranoia against Muslims post 9/11. But I don't think now the West has its own, the Western powers have their own compulsions and their own fascisms and their own forms of violence. And for them, India is a strategic partner against China. It's as simple as that. Against China, and that is the future going forward as far as, and it's a great buyer for arms, and they love, fossil fuels. So these are the things. Sometimes I think depending, like when there's a Democrat administration in power, they get a little disturbed about the anti-Muslim violence. If it is too obvious, it's too overt. But nothing changes. The Obama administration, the Trump administration, the Biden administration, all three have wholeheartedly embraced Modi. And yes, some of their senators, will ask people like me and look a little disturbed when they hear or when they read, but nothing really changes on the ground. But that is for a larger sort of global sort of security vision of India needing to be an ally against China.
The second last question. Siddharth, erasing the past, dealing with that Allahabad and other things, you also detail how the visual effect of the past also is getting changed by changing Google Maps and all those things. Basically, all these forms like Facebook and ultra modern mediums are running on the engines supplied by the finance capital. So, do you think is there any relationship between the neo-Hindutva and the neo-fascism and neo-liberalism?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the things that the Hindu Raj is very good at. It sort of has very well, captured the social media, sort of, the WhatsApp universities for, changing hate mail, the concocted news, fake news. So yes, I mean, and we know that they have massive, an IT cell that is paid for. We know that people are paid to troll and to create fake news and concoction and rumors. So they've been very, very effective at that because, they have deep ties with Indian diaspora in technology. I mean, both, not just the diaspora, the Indian IT here industry in India, but also in Silicon Valley. And they have been very adept at, exploiting that. But the other thing that you're talking about is that it's also not just that Google Maps is being changed, it's also on the ground. I mean, you look at Delhi, the parliament has been changed. I mean, why? How did it happen? We talk about democracy. How is it that it is possible that one party, one person can decide that they are going to rebuild the parliament of an entire nation? I mean, even the British were better than this. Even they had more of a semblance. I mean, I hate to say this, but even the colonial masters had more of a semblance of democracy than this. How is it possible to incorporate just Hindu rituals into every single national? And I'm critical of nationalism, even secular nationalism I'm critical of, but this is outrageous, and we've seen it being done very effectively. It's happening at many levels. It's social at the level of social media, but it's also on the ground. And therefore, we have to basically, if we are going to fight back against it, it has to also happen on all those levels equally. But yeah, the parliament has been changed. The whole, Delhi has been reimagined for the ego of one man and one particular, party.
The last question, and I would like to hear both from you. We're talking and giving kind of enlightenment to the people how the dangerous turns India is moving into in a detailed scenarios with the detailed scenarios. And your title itself, the second part of the title is Decline of India. So how to stop the decline from the perspective of the mobilizational politics? Of course, there need to be, like what you said, there's a huge dumping of content which is far from facts and fictitious content to divert the people, and all those things are happening. So in such a scenario, with the people of limited means, like you, Hartosh, and other people, other movements, what you both of you mentioned. So what would be your suggestions for them from the perspective of mobilizational politics to stop this decline? Some insights. Could be open, could be free.
Hartosh, you want to go?
I always shy away from things like this. As journalists, I can tell you what we've seen, and as opinion writers, often tell you what is going wrong, how to fix it, whether it is fixable or whether there are easy ways out. I actually do not know. I think we look at ideas, elite political formations, the churning of caste, what is happening to minorities. That much is certain that the Hindu right is not going away, that it has not been vacant, that there's a concentration of wealth and power in this country that supports the Hindu right that is very much intact. I think we are living through a period of churn and control that will extend over the next decade, 2 decades of my life. What we come out with at the end of it, I really don't know. It is just that at the moment, as journalists or intellectuals, writers, we need to do what we do. That is, do our journalism well, do our writing well, and then let's see what comes out at the other end. That's all.
Keep the people on alert. Like, sorry, that.
Yeah, I also hate giving advice of any kind because I feel not qualified at all. I think what Hatosh said is right, that as writers or journalists, we can only keep doing what we are doing as well as we can and with as much integrity as we can. In terms of larger social movements, I think that in some sense, the hard part is to imagine what a freer, better society would look like. And it's important for me not to get hung up on things like India, but like what my neighborhood, what my family, what my home, what my village, what my community looks like, and how much justice is there. I mean, and this is something that the left has, I'm critical of the left. The left has not been able to handle it very well. The changes, you can't have, like, you cannot campaign for, big things if you treat people around you badly, if you don't have any equality. And that is complicated because, we all have to ask questions of, who we are. Are we upper caste? Are we men? Are we, upper class? Did we get more education than others? These are uncomfortable questions because, but they are necessary questions to imagine a better society. And I think if we get better at doing that, then, maybe there's a way forward for the people. I mean, I think the fascism thrives on fear that, oh, they are taking over everything. There are so many of them, fear and ignorance. And I think in some sense, one has to live a life that is not based on fear and ignorance, but its opposites. And I think we have to live that as honestly as possible, even at the day-to-day level. So that's what I would say in terms of having a better, more just world.
Thank you, Siddharth and Santosh, and the people who are following on the Manchi YouTube channel, and a few of my friends who logged into this Zoom. Before winding up this session, I would like to request Siddharth, do you have any plans to bring it out in Telugu so that as you want to, as you in initial remarks, you mentioned that because these articles are under the paywall, so I want to bring it to the people more closer. So we are because we are part of my editor is also there, Vijay Rao, who is a part of a publication house based in Hyderabad. I would love to get a chance of translating it into Telugu.
I would love that because I have spent time, I mean, not this book, but my last nonfiction book, The Beautiful and the Damned, spends quite a bit of time in Hyderabad, and I've spent a lot of time in what is today Telangana, but as well as Andhra Pradesh, and I have reported quite extensively. So I am very aware of the intellectual and the political culture there and the literary culture. So I am very, very open to something like that. So all you need to do is reach out to me. I would be very happy. Yeah, I mean, I've spent time in Hyderabad when I was reporting The Beautiful and the Damned, and in the countryside. I was in many. I really loved my time in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. So it would be very nice to actually see the book be
We will
out.
write our concept and formally seeking permission to translate this book. And also, I would request you to get us through to Arundhati because when she was in Delhi, I used to contact. I got her permission to translate that Empire book. Now she got a new book on the stands. So our editor
Yes.
wanted to translate that also into Telugu. So
Well, I'm sure you can talk to, she's quite approachable, as you know. I haven't seen the new book yet. I think it just
yeah,
got done. So
yeah,
yeah, absolutely. But yeah,
thanks.
as far as I'm concerned, just get in touch with me. We'll take it from there. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Hartosh.
Thank you, Santosh. Thank you, Siddharth. Thank you all. Seshu, can you wind up the session? Seshu. Seshu,